Okay, so today we're diving into a thought experiment that's, well, it's fascinating and a little bit unsettling too. A world where 9/11 never happened.
Hmm.
We're not trying to downplay the tragedy of that day at all, but, we are going to be exploring this big what if. How might the world have unfolded differently?
Yeah, it's a complex question, but I think these sources we're looking at today, they really highlight how one event, as horrific as it was, it can have ripple effects across everything. Everything from global politics to, just our everyday lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit. The sources suggest that without 9/11, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq might not have happened.
Yeah.
That's a huge shift in the geopolitical landscape, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, yeah. Imagine a world where trillions of dollars weren't spent on those wars.
Yeah.
What could that have meant for things like domestic investments,
Yeah.
for scientific research, for global aid? The economic landscape could be vastly different today. Think about it.
Yeah. You're painting a pretty different picture here. And it's not just about the money, right?
Right.
The sources suggest that the entire Middle East might have evolved along a different path.
Yeah.
Though not necessarily peaceful.
Exactly. The absence of those wars doesn't guarantee peace. Right?
Right.
It's entirely possible that different conflicts, different power struggles, they would have emerged.
So maybe not a utopia, but certainly a different set of challenges, right?
Right.
Speaking of challenges, the sources also point to a different approach to global security.
Yeah.
Think about it. Airport security, without those long lines,
Mm-hmm.
the body scanners, the restrictions on liquids. Could you imagine just strolling right up to your gate? Think about that.
It's a stark contrast to what we're used to. Without the war on terror mentality, global security might have evolved with a different focus altogether. Perhaps more on, I don't know, things like cybersecurity, pandemics, or even climate change as security threats.
Okay, so that's interesting. So less focus on traditional military might.
Right.
And maybe more investment in technologies to address these other threats. What kind of world would that create for us? Would we feel safer or just differently vulnerable? What do you think?
That's a great question. It's all about how we define security, really. Maybe a world less focused on terrorism would have been more prepared for other challenges. Or maybe we'd be facing a whole different set of problems that we haven't even considered.
Yeah. It makes you wonder how priorities might have shifted. Speaking of priorities, these sources dive into how technological innovation itself could have been completely different. Imagine Silicon Valley, but instead of Facebook and surveillance tech, it's booming with renewable energy startups and companies racing to cure diseases. It's amazing.
It's a tantalizing thought, isn't it? Without the massive investments in surveillance technologies that were spurred by 9/11, who knows what technological marvels we might have today.
Right. Yeah, it's like a sliding doors moment for the entire tech industry. It makes me wonder about the economic implications. The sources suggest that 9/11 triggered a major economic downturn.
Yeah.
Especially in the airline industry.
Oh, yeah. Think about the ripple effects there. Even something like the widespread adoption of, body scanners.
Yeah.
That's a whole industry that might not have taken off in this alternate timeline.
Right.
And think about the potential long-term economic benefits of not spending trillions of dollars on those wars.
Yeah.
Those funds could have been used for all sorts of domestic investments, creating jobs and stimulating innovation in different sectors.
So we could be looking at a world with a different economic landscape, a different technological landscape,
right,
and maybe even a different set of values.
Right.
These sources touch on the idea that without 9/11, Islamophobia might have been less prevalent.
Yeah.
Leading to a smoother path toward cultural integration. Is that really plausible? What do you think about that?
Well, it's important to remember that prejudice and discrimination can exist without a catalyst like 9/11, right?
Right.
But it's plausible that the global atmosphere might be less charged.
Yeah.
With fear and suspicion towards certain groups.
Right.
Think about how media and cultural narratives might have evolved without the shadow of that tragedy.
Yeah.
Would we even talk about the world in the same way?
That's a great question. Would we be more open to different cultures and ideas?
Yeah.
Or would other fears and divisions take hold? It's hard to say for sure, but it's certainly a thought-provoking idea.
Yeah, and that's the point of this, that's the point of this deep dive, isn't it?
Right.
To challenge our assumptions and explore these what ifs, even if they lead us to uncomfortable places.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're just getting started. We've barely scratched the surface of how a world without 9/11 might have reshaped global politics,
Yeah.
security, the economy, and even our cultural fabric.
There's so much more to explore, including how this hypothetical scenario might have impacted military strategy,
Yeah.
immigration policies, and even the very nature of humanitarian aid and global development.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
They know.
But stick with us as we continue to unpack these complex and interconnected ideas in our deep dive into a world where 9/11 never happened.
Yeah. Let's shift gears for a moment and consider the impact on the military. These sources suggest that without 9/11, defense strategies and budgets would look vastly different. Instead of pouring trillions into counterterrorism and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, imagine those funds being channeled towards more traditional military preparedness, or even other branches of government entirely.
It's almost like a sliding doors moment for the entire military industrial complex.
Right.
A term, by the way, that refers to the close relationship between governments and the defense industry.
Right.
Without the war on terror, would the U.S. have maintained such a large-scale military presence around the world? What would become of NATO's mission?
Those are excellent questions, and it goes beyond just the military itself. Think about veteran affairs. The sheer number of service members deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan created a huge need for veteran healthcare and support systems.
Right.
In this alternate timeline, those resources might have been allocated to different social programs or even research and development in other fields.
That's a really interesting point. It makes you think about how 9/11 impacted, academia as well.
Yeah.
The sources mentioned that after the attacks, there was a massive shift in research funding towards terrorism studies, security, and Middle Eastern politics. What might universities be focusing on today if those resources had been, directed elsewhere? I mean, think about that.
It's fascinating to consider, isn't it? Perhaps we'd see more emphasis on climate science, renewable energy, or even space exploration. Maybe even entirely new fields of study would have emerged. And think about the impact on student exchange programs.
Yeah.
After 9/11, particularly for students from Muslim-majority countries, it became much harder to study abroad due to stricter visa regulations.
Right. So a world without 9/11 might have seen a much more open and interconnected academic landscape. It makes you wonder if we'd be further along in tackling some of the big, global challenges we're facing today.
Precisely. And speaking of interconnectedness,
Okay.
the sources also highlight the potential impact on immigration policies.
Yeah.
After 9/11, many countries tightened their borders and implemented stricter vetting procedures, often driven by security concerns.
Right.
Without that catalyst, would we be living in a world with more relaxed immigration policies?
It's certainly possible. Imagine a world where the movement of people and ideas across borders wasn't as fraught with, political tension and security anxieties.
Right.
These sources even suggest that the entire discourse around immigration might be less xenophobic and fear-driven.
It's a striking contrast to the reality we live in, where immigration is often framed through the lens of national security.
Yeah.
But of course there would still be complexities and challenges to navigate. Every decision has trade-offs. Even in a world without 9/11, there would be a need to balance openness with security, economic opportunity, with social cohesion.
It really underscores how interconnected these issues are, doesn't it? One change can set off a chain reaction with far-reaching consequences.
Simply.
But let's zoom back in on technology for a moment.
Okay.
We were talking about how 9/11 influenced the development of surveillance technologies.
Yeah.
The sources point out that after the attacks, there was a huge push for facial recognition software, data mining algorithms, and even the even the use of drones for surveillance purposes.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what the tech landscape might look like today if those resources had been channeled into different areas. Maybe we'd be living in a world with incredible advancements in renewable energy, personalized medicine, or even artificial intelligence focused on solving global problems rather than, tracking potential threats.
It's a tantalizing thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it raises questions about the ethical implications of technology as well. Would a world without 9/11 have fostered a different approach to data privacy and online security?
Yeah.
Would we be having different conversations about the balance between innovation and individual freedoms?
It's definitely something to ponder. And while we're pondering big questions, let's not forget about something as simple as, as simple as travel.
Yeah.
Think about a world without those long security lines.
Right.
The intrusive pat downs, the restrictions on liquids. Would airports be more relaxed and efficient? Would people feel more comfortable traveling to different parts of the world, especially to regions that have been, stereotyped or stigmatized in the wake of 9/11?
It's hard to imagine, isn't it? I mean, we've become so accustomed to the post 9/11 security theater,
Right.
that it's almost impossible to picture a world without it.
Yeah.
But these sources are really making me reconsider how much that one event has shaped our perceptions of safety, risk,
Yeah.
and even our freedom to move about the world.
It's a powerful reminder that even in a world without 9/11,
Right.
there would still be risks and challenges to navigate.
Yeah.
But perhaps the nature of those challenges and the way we approach them would be profoundly different.
So we've explored a world with a different military,
Yeah.
different universities,
Yeah.
different borders, even different airports.
Yeah.
It seems like no aspect of life would have been left untouched.
Absolutely. And as we delve deeper into this thought experiment,
Yeah.
it's important to consider not only the potential downsides of a post 9/11 world, but also the potential missed opportunities.
Right.
What if those trillions of dollars spent on war had been invested in tackling climate change or eradicating poverty or advancing medical research? What kind of world could we have created?
It's both inspiring and a little heartbreaking to think about all the possibilities it might have been.
Yeah.
But perhaps by exploring this alternate timeline, we can gain a deeper understanding of the choices we make,
Right.
the challenges we prioritize, and the world we want to build for the future.
Exactly. And there's one final area these sources explore
Right.
that I find particularly thought-provoking: the impact on humanitarian aid and global development.
Okay, now we're really getting into the big picture stuff. Tell me more.
Imagine those trillions of dollars spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan
Right.
being redirected towards humanitarian aid, poverty alleviation, or even investing in sustainable development in some of the world's most vulnerable regions. What kind of impact could that have had on global inequality, poverty, and even conflict prevention?
It's mind-boggling to think about the scale of the resources that were diverted to the war on terror.
Right.
It makes you wonder if we missed an opportunity to address some of the root causes of global instability and conflict.
And it's not just about, financial resources.
Right.
Think about the human capital, the expertise, the sheer brain power that was focused on counterterrorism efforts. Imagine all that talent being channeled towards solving global challenges like hunger
Yeah.
disease or climate change.
It's a sobering thought,
Yeah.
but also a reminder that we have the capacity to make different choices,
Yeah.
to prioritize different solutions, and to create a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely. And even beyond the practical implications, these sources highlight the potential for a less polarized, more unified world in the absence of 9/11. Without that defining moment of trauma and division, would we have seen less Islamophobia,
Yeah.
less xenophobia,
Yeah.
and a greater sense of global solidarity?
It's a hopeful thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
But also a reminder that even without 9/11,
Yeah.
we would still have to grapple with the complexities of human nature,
Yeah.
the potential for conflict,
Yeah.
and the challenge of building bridges across cultures and ideologies.
And perhaps that's the most valuable takeaway from this entire deep dive.
Yeah.
It's not about romanticizing a world without 9/11, but rather about recognizing the profound impact of that event.
Right.
The choices we've made in its aftermath and the possibilities that still lie ahead.
So much food for thought. These sources have really challenged me to think about the world in a whole new way.
Yeah.
I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same.
I'm certain they are. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
we'll explore some even more profound questions about how a world without 9/11 might have shaped our collective consciousness, our understanding of vulnerability, and even the very narratives we tell ourselves about resilience and human progress.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from geopolitics and technology to the very fabric of our everyday lives.
Yeah.
But these sources kind of push us to think even deeper, challenging us to consider how the absence of 9/11 might have shaped our collective consciousness, our shared understanding of the world.
It's a fascinating layer to add to this thought experiment, really. The sources argue that the post 9/11 world, particularly in Western nations, were shaped by narratives of resilience, loss, and a heightened sense of vulnerability. It was a defining moment that reshaped our understanding of safety and risk.
That makes sense. So without 9/11, would those narratives have been different? Would we be less preoccupied with terrorism as an existential threat? How would we even define safety or risk in a world where that event hadn't happened?
It's a really interesting question. Maybe other global events, natural disasters, pandemics, economic crises, they would have taken on a more prominent role in shaping our understanding of vulnerability. Imagine if the same level of resources and attention that went into counterterrorism after 9/11 had been focused on, say, pandemic preparedness or climate change mitigation.
Okay, so maybe instead of airport security being the defining feature of travel, it's pandemic checkpoints or environmental impact assessments. That's a wild thought, right?
It is, and it's not just about practical measures. Think about the stories we tell ourselves, the cultural narratives that shape our understanding of the world. The sources they mention that art, literature, even blockbuster movies were heavily influenced by the themes of terrorism and heroism that emerged after 9/11.
You're right. So many post 9/11 films and TV shows explored those themes of fear, resilience, the fight against terrorism. But what if those creative energies had been channeled into exploring different themes?
Yeah.
What if climate change or the ethical dilemmas of artificial intelligence or the human stories of migration and cultural exchange? What if those became the dominant narratives of our time?
We might be consuming, entirely different media, hearing different stories, and ultimately seeing the world through a different lens. It makes you wonder how those alternative narratives might have influenced our values, our priorities, even our political discourse.
It's mind-blowing to contemplate. It's almost like we're glimpsing into a parallel universe where the cultural landscape is both familiar and strangely different. But it's not just about entertainment, is it? This goes deeper to our core beliefs about humanity and our place in the world.
Absolutely. The sources argue that 9/11 had a profound impact on our collective psyche, particularly in the West. It shattered a sense of security and invulnerability that many people took for granted. It forced us to confront our own mortality and the fragility of the systems we rely on.
And without that collective trauma, would we have developed a different sense of resilience? Or maybe even a different understanding of human nature itself?
Yeah.
Would we be more optimistic, more trusting? Or would we simply find find different things to fear and worry about?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's a question worth pondering. Maybe we'd be more focused on building a sustainable future, on tackling global challenges like poverty and inequality, or maybe we'd be just as divided and conflict prone, just along different fault lines.
That's a good point. It's tempting to romanticize a world without 9/11.
Yeah.
But these sources remind us that even without that specific event, humanity wouldn't be immune to conflict,
Yeah.
tragedy, or the darker aspects of our nature.
Exactly. This deep dive isn't about, painting a utopian picture of what might have been. It's about challenging our assumptions, exploring the complexities of history, and understanding how even the most horrific events can have unintended consequences, both positive and negative.
So what's the ultimate takeaway here? What can we learn from this hypothetical journey into a world that never experienced 9/11?
I think the most valuable lesson is the importance of perspective. This exercise has shown us how a single event can reshape the course of history.
Yeah.
And it challenges us to think critically about the narratives we embrace, the choices we make, and the world we're creating for future generations.
It's been a wild ride, hasn't
Yeah.
it? We've explored alternative timelines, imagined different technologies, and pondered the very nature of human consciousness.
We have, and it all started with a simple question: what if? It's a question that can unlock, endless possibilities, challenge our assumptions, and ultimately lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
This deep dive has definitely left me with a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's done the same for you. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of a world where 9/11 never happened.
Yeah.
We'll be back next week with another fascinating deep dive into history, ideas, and the big questions that shape our understanding of the world. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring the endless possibilities of the what if.